The success of San Bernardino's downtown area is essential for the success of all areas of San Bernardino. Therefore, what is your vision for re-energizing the downtown area?
Well, it's true. I think the ward system, one of the handicaps of the ward system is it tends to make people become very provincial. And there really is a need to understand that there's a general focus for the whole community, that one ward is not going to benefit unless the entire city benefits. In other words, the bankruptcy in downtown San Bernardino is going to affect the 7th Ward. It's not going to be good. Your streets are not going to be filled with, the potholes aren't going to be filled, and the police are not going to be able to get to your neighborhood as fast as they did before, and so forth. With regard to the Central City Mall, we're at the point. Fortunately, one of the things that when I ran for office in the recall election 2 years ago, that nobody was talking about economic development. Our redevelopment agency, which was in charge of economic development, had closed in February 1st of 2012. And now we're talking about the fall of 2013. And nobody in the meantime had thought about what are we going to do about economic development and about business relations, business retention. Nobody was dealing with that at all. And so one of the points that I focused on was overall economic development. We really did need to have, and people know about economic development, but the point is there's a profession of economic development and really need to get a professional staff involved with economic development. So when I took office, I talked with the city manager, and he was on board. He had been thinking about this, and but again, it's a kind of thing that if you don't see any kind of sounding board that you can rely on to again develop sort of the basic mass to get an emphasis fulfilled. You don't press it very hard, and plus with the bankruptcy as well. But immediately he really got on the process of looking for restructuring his departments to develop a professional economic development staff. And within a few months, we hired Bill Manis, who's just a super individual. And now Bill Manis is hiring 2 associates to help him out. And what Bill did, he recognized that we really needed to have an information system. In other words, we probably had a lower grade information system. I know the Economic Development Agency developed this kind of an index, but what he had purchased was an information system where every parcel of commercial land, industrial land in the city is indexed. Size, what kind of infrastructure is there, what size streets are located on it, what coordinates and what kind of the wording. I'll just say infrastructure, repeat the wording. And so somebody coming into San Bernardino looking for a particular commercial plot of ground, he can plug those wishes into the information system and out pops what's available. So, and obviously that's a big help. So people from outside the community can, even without coming to San Bernardino, can get a printout with a map, with a rundown of just what's there and so forth. So that's one good aspect. But also too, there's a need with regard to the Carousel Mall property, obviously, and in the background I'm going to say something also about the Harris Company building and about the old Ramada Hotel and Convention Center. But I think the keystone for downtown is the almost abandoned Carousel Mall property. It was probably a bad investment to begin with. It was viable for a few years. It was begun about 1970. And it really sucked the life out of downtown. That was predictable. And so it did very well for about the first 10 years, but the point is that we had the Inland Center located with about 2 miles away, and they were competing with one another. But as soon as you had Ontario Mills and you had the upgrade of the Tyler Mall, there was an alternative to that. And so something had to go. And basically, almost immediately, and it's a fact across the country, many malls about the size of the Carousel are out of business. And one of the emphases in planning, well, what's the next use of that mall? Well, the Riverside Mall on Central Avenue in Riverside, they took the roof off of it. They turned it into something like Victoria Gardens. And of course, once Victoria Gardens it really wiped out whatever potential was for the Carousel Mall. So we have the Carousel Mall. But the point is, we didn't possess all the properties in the Carousel Mall. The Penny's property is owned by the San Manuels. And I think years past, they were thinking about maybe some sort of a gambling opportunity there. But the point is that there were some negotiations, and there had to be some negotiations with there were several, maybe a dozen different property owners engaged with it, and attorneys and so forth. But Bill worked through all that stuff, and now we're at the point. He had about a dozen proposals when we sent out the RFPs, and with a dozen proposals, he made them produce their financial, who's supporting them, what have they got. Often we never did that. The cinemas, we had the Cinema Star Corporation come in to operate the cinema originally. They didn't have the financial back. They built it, and they had one in Riverside, but within a couple of years they went out of business. So Bill was able to eliminate all but two sound proposals for the mall, and I think we're going to be taking a look at that, the one they're going to select in soon, probably in October. So it looks like it's going to mix land use. It's going to take a number of years. Again, people think, immediate gratification. It's going to take years for any kind of a project to take place. And I keep on repeating that in so many situations. People say, well, this bankruptcy is going to go. It's not going to happen overnight. Everything we're talking about in terms of partnerships, it takes years to develop those sorts of things that we want to come out with. And so I think there's some good ideas that have been proposed. But, what's the next? Well, one of the advantages, and this is where we get back to the SBX, is that this is going to be within, say, less than a quarter mile of the Metrolink. And so people who live in the apartments, who are able to maybe go to the Starbucks that are located downstairs, and maybe hope we'll have some restaurants and so forth. So it'll be a destination and a place where people can live and recreate and so forth without necessarily getting into their cars. They could work any place between here and Los Angeles. And it's just a walk. They don't need a car. And of course, that's the advantage of this kind of compact development. You call it the new urbanism, is the fact that people are there's a new ideas about living. I mean, when I was growing up, everyone wanted a single-family home in the suburbs and green grass and so forth, and apartment living. It was kind of a non-starter. But the point is, everybody, even then, lived in an apartment. One of the things that always bothered me is that people in the 7th Ward and elsewhere didn't want any apartment construction. Well, in a way, when I first came here, we had a flood of apartments. Maybe that jaded their ideas about apartment houses, but they didn't want to have any apartment construction. Well, the reality is, in meetings where I talk to a variety of citizens, how many here have never lived in an apartment? And rarely do you find, a majority that haven't lived in an apartment. I mean, maybe never. At some point in time, you live in an apartment. It's just a fact of life. So, the mixed land use and the whole idea today is that people are interested in, and even professionals, living with less space. You don't necessarily want to have the lawns and the other problem. Not everybody necessarily wants to live in a mixed land use area, but the point is, it's been shown by studies that 30% of the adult population wouldn't mind living with less space if they were close to where they worked or close to transportation. And 30% is pretty good market out there. And they're not being served. If we continue to build single-family dwellings, we're not servicing the market that would prefer to have less space and not the fewer problems that go along with having less space. So, but the next step is, okay, you got the central city. What about the areas peripheral to? What about charging development then for the rest of the downtown? Are we going to have this hot spot of, new urbanism within a otherwise blighted downtown? And so, you take a look at the big picture. How can we, as we're constructing this revitalization of the mall property, how can we energize the contiguous and then the next ring so that we have really a viable downtown as a whole? Obviously, the carousel property is going to be one of the mainstays, but the point is we really need to think in broader terms.